Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marco Meyer, and you are listening to the Weekly Dartscast 180.
Hello, and welcome to an episode of the Weekly Dartscast, sponsored by Dartwolf. I'm Alex Moss, and alongside me, my co-host, it is the Darts statistician, the Darts Driver King, Burton DeWitt. It's been a couple of weeks since we last recorded, so how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Enjoying Michael Smith being world champion for the first time, as I'll be enjoying all year. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing all right, thank you. Colchester win at the weekend always makes a Monday a little bit better, and there's been a few more than usual of them, which is good to see. But we've got lots to get to on the show because the darts, it doesn't stop. We've just had Q School last week, which we'll look back on in a moment. You'll hear from two of the new tour card holders for 2023, Graham Usher and Dylan Slevin later on. We'll also get into some World Series, some Premier League chat, the Weekly Dartscast Awards as well. So it's going to be a busy one. But let's start the show with a look back at Q School. It came to an end on Sunday, the final day. We now once again have our full quota of 128 tour card holders in the PDC ready for the new season. And of those 27 players who won tour cards last week, I think 12 of them have held tour cards before. So of those players that are coming back onto the tour, who are you most excited to see?
Well, I guess I'll start with the oldest of the people to win back their card, just because it'll be exciting to see how loudly Dan Dawson can yell his name if he throws another 9-darter on the Pro Tour. And that's, okay, sure, Ronnie Hybrex has made a World Cup final. He's been semi-final to the European Championship before anyone knew who he was. So, he's had some good moments, but I think that 9-darter, the first one ever on the live streaming boards on the Pro Tour, that Dan Dawson called, is one of the iconic moments in Pro Tour history. To see him back on the Pro Tour, to be able to see Dan Dawson somehow yell louder when someone throws a 9-darter than he did when Ronnie Hybrex did. It's a challenge that I'm laying down for Dan Dawson this year. Can you yell louder for Ronnie Hybrex this year than you did 5-6 years ago? But jokes aside, I am excited to see him back. It's been a 3-year drought for him, and there wasn't much to suggest that he was going to win back his tour card this year. He hasn't been all that close the last couple of years at Q School, and he hasn't done that much on the Challenge Tour. But again, it's been a weird couple of years. Last year was the first year that things were back to normal. And we've seen players who last year started playing well again after struggling for a while. In Ronnie Hybrex's case, he started struggling long before the COVID pandemic started, but it obviously didn't help him get match fit to get back into form. He had a good week because he had to start at the first stage, and nearly did enough on the first day, getting all the way through the final, and looked the best player on that first day before just not having it in the final. Is a player that isn't the most naturally skilled player, but he always gives his best. And if he's playing with confidence, he can beat almost anyone on the tour. Beyond that, you have a couple players who, had they not lost their tour cards, were looking really well to qualify for some majors this year. Keegan Brown won an event just back in the middle of last year, his second, but his first in 7 years. But it wasn't enough to save his tour card because of how poor he had been for the previous year and a half up to that. He didn't light up the tour even after that title. But again, he's someone who was able to win an event last year. That in and of itself shows how good he is and can be. Now that he's won back his card, now that he doesn't have the pressure on him that he had even after winning that title to keep getting ranking money to save his card, maybe he'll play with some freedom that title otherwise would have given him the chance to have. But beyond that, I'll say two more. Karel Sedlacek, he wasn't on the tour last year, but nearly got into the top 64 anyway, mostly through qualifying for a lot of the Euro Tour events. But when we saw him on the Pro Tour, when we saw him on the televised stage, he is a difficult opponent and a very, very good player. Back after a 1-year absence from the tour, and every reason to think that he'll hit the ground running this year. And then also Stephen Burton fell off the tour a few years ago as well, and was one of those players who looked like he maybe needed a 3-year tour card, as I've labeled a bunch of people before. He was playing really well when he dropped off the tour. Everyone thought would win it back through Q School the following year. And even when he didn't, the couple years after that, kept thinking he would win it back, was always there or thereabouts. Player who can throw in ton plus averages for fun. Somehow had not been able to win back his card the last few years, but now is back on tour. I think there's one more worth mentioning, but I'll leave it to him. He's only made a major final in his only year really playing the circuit. But I'll leave you to talk about that guy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, some good picks there, and I'm going to have to go and dig out that clip of Ronnie Hybrex after we've finished recording, because I do vaguely remember that. And hopefully we'll get some more of that this year. And interesting that you mentioned Stephen Burton as well, who's a local player to me, plays for the local Super League team. Not that I play for them, but the team that's closest to me. And had a chat with him earlier, and he said he's going to be committing a bit more of his time to darts this year. He's a self-employed window cleaner, which he said he's got no intentions of giving up. He enjoys that work that he does, but he's going to maybe look to take maybe 1 or 2 days off work during the week and dedicate more time to the game. So yeah, definitely a player to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think the one name that is standing out the most for me and a lot of our listeners, because this is our question of the week on Twitter, the options I put out on there were Corey Cadby, Jeffrey Desvan, Keegan Brown and other, and we've had close to 1,000 votes already, so thanks to everyone who's voted. But 68% are going with Corey Cadby, so it's quite one-sided amongst our listeners at the moment. We've had a few get in touch with their comments as well. Linda Duffy, a former guest on the show, former ladies world number one, who manages Josh Payne, and she of course mentioned Josh Payne. He's another player who, like the other three I just mentioned, they've won a PDC title in the past. Simon got in touch and said Mike Kyvenhoven, had a short talk with him in Leverkusen after the crowd booed him in his first round match. Decent guy, deserves all the best. And Robbo Halloran says Desvan, in the hope that it galvanises him like winning a card back did for Van Dyvenbode, a potential major winner if he rediscovers his 2018-19 form. But for me, I'm with the majority of our listeners here. I think Corey Cadby, of the returning tour card holders, is the one I'm most excited to see this season. And you look back at the first run that he had in the PDC, and it was pretty explosive, wasn't it? His second game on TV beats Phil Taylor in the World Series events, goes on to win that World Youth title, makes his Ali Pali debut, and a year or so later we see him go to Q School for the first time, get his tour card on the first day, and a few weeks later he's winning an event on the floor, and a few weeks after that he's making that first major final at the UK Open. And that's coming up to 5 years ago now, and the 5 years that followed that UK Open final until now, we've not seen as much of Corey Cadby on the Oki as we perhaps thought we would have done. He handed in his tour card at the start of 2020, and we've rarely heard from him until recently, when his management, he's part of Mac Elkin's stable, announced that he would be going to Q School this year to try and get his tour card back. And we know he's had his challenges away from darts. That's been a big contributing factor to why he's a possible answer to this question, because the quality that he's got, you would have expected him not to be at Q School. You'd expect him to have that card, but of course he's not played for a while now. But he's come back, and he said after winning his card that the king is back, and only time really is going to tell with that if he can get back to where he was before, winning events on the floor, getting to a major final, because the tour can be tough. But I think there was a few instances that we saw last week where he has come through that adversity that can happen at Q School, that the first day of both the stages he went out early on, but look at how he bounced back both times. That the second day of the first stage going all the way to get through, and then the second day of the final stage going all the way. And the scoring was there. He had the highest first nine average across both Q Schools, and on Dart Connect, the percentage of 140 plus visits, 180 visits, they're in the top 5 as well. The doubles, that's an area of his game that he's going to have to tighten up, maybe a little bit rusty from some time away, but he's definitely the name, given what we saw in that first run in the PDC, that I'm excited to see what he's going to do now he's back on the tour.
All right, so we talked about the players who are back on the tour after having previously had a tour card. But did anyone else catch your eyes from the 7 days in Milton Keynes and Kalkar, whether players who won a card for the first time or some players who played well but didn't win a card?
Yeah, definitely was. And one of them that I was going to mention that you mentioned in the first question that we had, and that was Ronnie Hybrex, because we have got two brothers on the tour again. We had it in the past with Kim and Ronnie together, Stephen and Tony West, but as you touched on, with Ronnie losing his tour card at the end of 2019, and he was unsuccessful in getting it back for the next 3 years, but to get it back this year, and at the age of 57, you can't really fault his determination, can you, to keep coming back, and now he has got that tour card back. So yeah, he was one I was going to mention off the bat. And we did see a bit of history last week in both Q Schools. We saw Christian Perez, the first player from the Philippines to win a tour card at Q School, and then in the Q School in Germany, Jacques Labre becoming the first Frenchman to win a tour card. And both of them winning cards, that is going to bring some interest into the game from different areas where maybe it's not the most popular sport. And with Christian, we saw him at the Grand Slam and at Ali Pali, and I think only the the fourth or fifth player from Asia to win a tour card. So we don't see players from that continent often win cards. Not many of them come over to try out Q School. But as we've spoke about before, pre-pandemic Asian darts, particularly in steel tip, that was an area of the game which was showing some encouraging signs of development. And for a lot of the last 2 or 3 years, that's been held back with not much activity. But at the end of last year, we did see the PDC put on that Asian Championship, which Christian Perez won to get those spots in the Grand Slam and the World Championship. This year, the Asian Tour's set to resume as well after 3 years away. But I think having a player with a tour card, you'd hope that's going to encourage more players to firstly have a go at the Asian Tour, and then maybe next year or in years to come give Q School a go as well. So I think that's important that we've got a player from Asia that's got a tour card. And with Jacques, someone that made some big strides last year. And I know a lot of talk when it comes to French darts, it does stem around Thibaut Tricol because he had that run to Lakeside getting to the final. But Jacques had a great 2022 as well. He won Challenge Tour like Thibaut did, and also won the WDF World Cup singles men's titles. So he had a really good last year as well. And going into that last day of Q School, both of them, Thibaut and Jacques, they're on 4 points each just outside the spots. So it shows that both of them were able to compete, and one of them, they've made a bit of history there. But aside from those, a few other players I'll give a mention to, and more of the younger talent coming through. We spoke about players getting their tour cards back. Not many of the players that lost them at the end of last year got them back. I think only a handful of them, but there was a lot of players, a lot of younger players that we've seen get tour cards for the first time. The likes of Gian Van Veen, who got to a final on the Players' Championships last year, Dylan Slevin, who you're going to hear from later, Owen Roloffs, all three of them 20 years old. And then you've got one of the unknown quantities, if you like, in Pascal Ruprecht, probably butchered that name, but the German 22, hardly anyone knew about him before last week, but he certainly caught the eye. And first time at Q School, didn't even have to play the final day because he'd done enough. He'd got enough points already. So he's a name that not many people would have known before last week, but they certainly do now.
Yeah, and I'll start with the player that you finished off with. Player that, from what I've heard, hadn't even decided till 20 minutes before the deadline to register for Q School. Ended up registering, and as you mentioned, won a tour card with a day to spare through the order of merit. Didn't have to play the final day. But it's not just that. He averaged over 90, which only half the people who won a tour card and a further 9 players who didn't manage to do. So of the 600 people who played at Q School, 800 people who played at Q School, he was in the top 140th, 2.5% in terms of averages, averaging 90 over the week. And the people who beat him were all people who won tour cards pretty much. Okay, he lost to a couple people early on in the first stage when he'd done enough on the first day to advance that ended up not winning tour cards. But those players still averaged over 90 to beat him. And the other one who beat him on the first day was Daniel Closa, who won a tour card. All 3 people who beat him in that final stage ended up winning tour cards themselves. Jacques Labra, who you mentioned, Corey Cadby, who we both mentioned, and some guy named Jeffrey Deswan, who only is a world match play semifinalist in the past. And Deswan averaged 107 in that match. So, you had to be playing well to beat him. And I don't just mean well in the match, well enough to win a tour card. Those are the people who beat him, were people who won their tour card as well. It was a really, really impressive performance by Pascal Ruprecht all around. Beyond that, you mentioned Christian Perez. I was going to mention him as well. First Filipino player to win a tour card. I've been saying for a while, I think there will be eventually an Asian player who gives the tour a proper go and becomes a top player. We need to see more of Christian Perez before I'm going to say he's going to be it, but he has that chance. It's going to be difficult, and it depends. Is he going to live in the UK or Europe, or is he going to be commuting? That will make a big difference. He's obviously a capable player, and that's why he won his tour card and did almost enough on the first day, but still had to get a couple of results on the final day. And that last match against Lewis Pride on the final day, in the end, he knew he needed to win at least one leg, because if he lost 6-0, he would have dropped behind 3 players. But getting it to 6-5 ended up making the difference. A 6-4 loss, he would not have won his tour card. And he had to break to get back in that match twice to get it to eventually, he took a 5-4 lead, but he had been down 2-0 and 4-2 in that match and came back and in the end needed to get all 5 legs that he won, and did that with all that pressure on him. that'll bode him well that he was able to do that under that pressure. Of people who didn't win a tour card, I mean, you mentioned Usher.calls. I mean, he was impressive. He just didn't win enough matches in the end, but he had the fourth highest average of anyone who didn't win a tour card. He played well across pretty much all 4 days, just other than on the last day where he didn't have it against Dirk Telnecky's. But Telnecky's averaged nearly 100 against him anyway. It was an impressive performance. It just wasn't enough. But, also like some other players who ran it close: John Henderson, Max Hopp, Andy Bolton, Jamie Lewis, all former tour card holders, but they just didn't get enough results in the end, but played well. There'll be players to look out for on the Challenge Tour this year. And then I'll just end with two North Americans. Jacob Taylor, who was the first man out on the European Order of Merit in the end, came very close to winning it. And Alex Spellman, not the American name that most people knew, and not the one I would have tipped as the highest. I would have gone Danny Lauby for that, who was playing in the UK Q School. Spellman was playing in the European one. But Spellman is a player to look out for. He's played very well in the CDC in the back half of 2022. Did a very good showing of himself at Q School. And, I mentioned those players who lost out to people who won tour cards. Well, 3 of the 4 he lost out to in the second stage also won tour cards. Neil Zonneveld, Pascal Ruprecht, and Jeffrey Deswan. And then the player he lost out to on the final day, Barry Vampire, was the 3rd or 4th player out of the tour card spot. So you had to do really well to beat him. You had to go on and win a tour card, basically, or be very close to. And he'll be a player, if he plays the Challenge Tour, to look out for this year.
And now we'll move on to our first guest on this week's show. He is a former quarter-finalist in the World Masters. He is a fellow Middlesbrough fan like you are, Burton, but most important of all, he is one of the new tour card holders for 2023. Here's our chat with Graham Usher. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by one of the new tour card holders for 2023, Graham Usher. Thanks for the time, Graham. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, yeah. Been a couple of days with messages and well wishes, so yeah, looking forward to getting started on the Pro Tour now.
Well, we're talking still only 4 days after you won your tour card outright, the second day of the final stage of this year's UK Q School. Has it sunk in fully now that for the first time you are a PDC tour card holder?
Yeah, it took a day or so to sort of sink in and get back home and sort it out, then back to work on Monday, and then to a lot of messages and good wishes from people. So yeah, it has sunk in now, and now the practice starts properly, and it's exciting.
And when I last spoke with you on this show, it was just before your first go at Q School in 2020, and you probably don't remember, but you signed off by saying, I hope to speak to you again soon with a tour card. 3 years later, and here you are.
Yeah, it took a bit longer than I wanted it to do, but we got there in the end. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's exciting times.
Well, looking back at that first Q School in 2020, you came very close to winning that card on the final day. Not long after that, the world shuts down with the virus. Yourself working in the NHS, I'm sure it was a very busy time for you. So did darts take a back seat for a little while during those few years?
Yeah, definitely. It was hard at work. It was hard for everybody, but darts definitely did sort of take a back seat. We played the odd online darts leagues when they first started, like I say, just to sort of keep you a little bit interested, but actual face-to-face match just for everybody, and so especially working sort of longer hours than we used to at the hospital, it definitely took a back seat.
Yeah, it's an uncertain time for a lot of people, and that year you did get the chance to play in a handful of the Players' Championship events as one of the top-up players from the Challenge Tour. So how much were you able to take away from those opportunities, that early taste of the Pro Tour?
Getting mate there, got a bit starstruck at first, you're playing with these people that you watch on TV, and yeah, I've had 4 or 5 goes at now, and realising that they're no different to you or me or anybody else. So yeah, that has helped to sort of settle in there, get used to the environment and know what it's all about. So now we'll do it on a regular basis. Hopefully we can keep improving.
Definitely, and 2021, that was quite a stop-start year with the Challenge Tour. A lot of darts not coming back until later on in the year. But going into last year, we did see a lot of events coming back. The calendar starting to fill up again. So how did you approach last year after you missed out on that tour card at the start of 2022?
The big thing was Modus Super Series. Obviously getting invited to sort of go down there and play some match practice behind closed doors was a massive help, and it's been a big thing over the last sort of 18 months for me, really, getting to play on big stages now with Modus, in front of the TVs, and so that's been a massive stepping stone for me.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen the Modus Super Series, something that's really taken off in the last few years. We've seen a little bit of a crowd coming for some of the sessions as well, and also with the Challenge Tour last year, I think you had a pair of semi-finals, 1 or 2 quarter-final runs in there. So coming into Q School this year, did you feel your game was maybe in the best place it's been heading into a Q School?
Yeah, I think into any competition, and I think this was the sort of most consistent averages I've been. You know, I'd have 105, 106, and then an 85. It was no consistency, but I think also last week I don't think I averaged under 90. I know averages don't win games, but that sort of gives you an idea of where your level's at. But yeah, I felt so good. Tweak me through a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit more of a pause before I release to sort of the rat-tat-tat, and it seems to have paid off, you know, and it must have gone to us. I've got my card, and yeah, excited.
Yes, turned out well. Well, let's get on to last week at Q School, and before we get on to your game, we should mention that you weren't the only Usher playing at Milton Keynes. Your son Joe also went for the first time as a player. What was it like for that first stage, playing yourself but also following your son as well, and did you fear you two might draw each other?
I was hoping not to draw him. Obviously, I was well as also, but I think Joe went down for the experience. I don't think he expected too much out of it. He wanted to sort of step up after playing the development tour, and this is the next stage for him, is the Challenge Tour. He played okay. I was more nervous watching him than playing. I tried not to watch him too much, and that sounds awful, but it just doesn't do me any good. I don't know where he copes watching me.
Yeah, you mentioned that your son Joe, he's obviously been one of the big supporters for you with your darts, even going back to that World Masters, getting to the final day, then having a first go at Q School. You also had your grandson that you mentioned following on as well. So how much has their support meant to you as the week went on last week?
I mean, the whole family, you know, I didn't really mention the whole family and sort of behind at work. You know, work's been tremendous, giving me time off and letting me go to the Pro Tours when I get invited at short notice. Lads changing shifts, and having Joe there with me, it helps a lot to have a face there that from home that sort of, if you're doing something wrong, they can sort of nod or slow down, speed up, and things like that. My grandson, he sent me a message saying good luck, gang, and a video message. And every time I was thrown for a double at Q School, I was saying to him, come on, good luck, granddad. And it seemed to work, so yeah, once your mind's in a good place, darts follow. So.
And as far as Q School campaigns go, yours couldn't have gone much better last week. 20 wins, just 2 defeats from the 4 days that you played across the 2 stages. You edged through a couple of deciders, though, that first day of the final stage. Was there a particular point when you really started to believe that a tour card was in your sight?
From day one. I know that sounds maybe a bit clever, but I did believe that my game was there this time. I went in there feeling good, mentally and physically, really. No aches and pains, getting on a bit now, but I just felt good. I said to Joe before I got there, I said, I'm going to get a card. And he said, good, that's the first time I've ever said that. It's always, well, just see what happens. But, you know, I didn't fear anybody. Before, I used to look at names, or if I beat him, I've got him, or, you know, I obviously played fun in the early stages. You know, a year ago, you'd have been worried about sort of losing. No, I just believe in the game now.
Well, we definitely saw that, and had you lost that final on the second day to Adam Warner, the points that you'd racked up already, there would have been enough to get that tour card via the Order of Merit. But to do it outright with 2 days to spare, what did that mean to you?
Oh yeah, to get the job done and dusted and have that tour card with a win, meaning that the players that are there are more than capable of being on the Pro Tour, and in effect it's like winning a Pro Tour if that makes sense, you know, winning the day and getting the interview at the end. I said to Joe before I played the final, I've got enough points, and he just said to me, don't worry about that, just win. So yeah, it was great, fantastic, and to have Joe there as well. He's the first one to come straight, run up to me just before the interview, and I think he was more excited than I was.
Well, it was a nice start to the weekend, getting that tour card secured early on the Friday evening. So what was it like then going back home, seeing all the family afterwards? Was it an emotional moment, or was it pure celebration at what you'd achieved?
Yeah, I mean, Joe's a season ticket holder at Middlesbrough, so we didn't go straight home. He dragged me to the Borough match for my sins. So I had to suffer that for 90 minutes, and then we finally got home about 7 o'clock Saturday night. Yeah, all the family were really chuffed and pleased, and my grandson was sort of playing darts when I got in. Actually, he plays more than me, and he's very, very good at the minute. Believe it or not, I'll have to send you a video. You won't believe it.
Yeah, definitely want to see that. And you mentioned Middlesbrough as well. My co-host of our show, Burton, he's a Middlesbrough fan. He was disappointed to see Glenn Durrant drop off the tour, but he was pleased when I told him that you're a Borough fan as well. As a Colchester fan, I don't often look that high up in the league. I did today before this interview. Saw that Middlesbrough, they're 4th in the Championship. So are you daring to dream yet?
You never know. Strange things have happened. I think, getting Carrick in has been a good thing. See what happens with him. Yeah, fingers crossed. Definitely the playoffs, I think. Get in there and Premier League, here we come.
Happy days. Well, away from yourself, I know from when we've had you on the show before, you're good friends with Scott Williams, Leighton Bennett. Scott, you'll be seeing a lot of on the tour for the next few years. Leighton, we saw at Q School again, didn't produce his best game this year. Obviously, Leighton's a young player, a lot of talent, and he's had a lot of attention on him. So where do you think he goes from here?
Leighton, I think he's stopped doing the hard work at the minute. I think he needs to sort of get back, knuckle down, and play the darts that we all know he's capable of. He's a phenomenal talent, probably one of the best talents I've ever seen. Like I say, I don't know if it's just the instant intent, the attention he got. I think it was hard for a 16-year-old, 13-year-old when he sort of first got sort of really known to take all that in. It's hard. I've just got a tour card and I've had a lot of attention and I'm a nobody. So for a young lad like Leighton, he'll be back. He'll definitely be back. He's too good not to be back.
Well, let's get back to you, and we've seen with your shirt as well that you are nicknamed the Gambler. So where does that nickname come from?
It's me father. He liked to have a little bit of a bet here and there. Nothing, not a major gambler, but I used to say if there was 2 flies climbing the wall, he'd have a pound on it to see who won. So, and he always used to say, if I ever made it on TV, I think I'd have to be called the Gambler. And it's more of a tribute to him, really, because he passed away in 2010. And when he was really poorly, I said to him, look, if I ever make it, I'll put the Gambler on my shirt. So even though it's not directed to me, I know what it means, and it means a lot.
That's a nice touch. And when we spoke at the World Masters for your TV debut, you walked out to Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer. That was a request from Joe, but Madders Razmat, he already uses that song in the PDC, so you're going to please us and go with one of your namesake Usher's greatest hits when you next go on the stage?
Yeah, well, as been mentioned, I've got to come out to an Usher song now, so I need to sort of brush up on that and see what tunes they actually got. Someone sent me a remix of The Gambler, the song The Gambler. That was quite bouncy and jumpy, but yeah, we'll sort something out, I suppose, and get something to get the crowd going if we get that far.
Great to hear. And just before Q School as well, it was announced that you'd signed with the manufacturer Perfect 9. What's that support been like from them so far? Have you had any darts made for you yet?
I've literally just signed days before sort of Q School. They sent me a few badges out to put on my shirt and that for now, and they've been in touch to sort of stems and flights and dart shirts, different styles, and we've got to get together and design a new dart. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be good.
As we said, this is your first tour card, but we've seen you as a qualifier in one of the early UK Opens. You've played on the TV, you've played the Modus League, a few of the Players' Championships as well. So how much do you think those past experiences are going to help you when you go on to the tour? It's not going to be completely new for you.
No, they're going to help a lot. Like I say, to get into that environment, it always takes you a few goes to settle in. It did with Modus. The first few times I was there, I didn't do great, and then I seemed to sort of peak at the Modus when I went down there. And moving on to the Pro Tours and things, I think because I've had a little bit of a taste of it, and I know what to expect. Obviously I'm still going to be learning, but I'm not going down there a bit, I don't know what's going to be like or what the people are going to be like, or they're all good. It's all good for you.
And lastly, before we let you go, we're talking around 3 or 4 weeks before the first lot of Pro Tours for the season. Having that tour card, it does give you a lot of potential opportunities. Obviously, the main goal for any new tour card holder is to get in that top 64 after the 2 years. But is there anything short term you'd like to tick off, say in the first few months, first year of having that card?
Obviously, get a few wins under my belt. It'd be nice to win a board final and see what happens from there. But it's going to be tough. I'm not kidding myself. People say, the hard work's there, you got your card, but the hard work, it starts now, the hard work, And when I got my tour card, I've got to say that I got a phone call from Rob Cross half an hour after he'd lost in Bahrain. So he called me from Bahrain to wish me, to say good luck, well done, and he was proud. So that was a nice touch.
Fair play to him. Well, Graham, here's our congratulations from us as well. Congratulations on getting that tour card at Q School, and we wish you all the best for what comes for the next 2 years at least on the tour.
Yeah, thank you very much, and stay in touch, and hopefully speak soon with a Pro Tour win. You never know.
Thanks again to Graham for joining us, and moving on from Q School, let's look to some events coming up, and one of the big events coming up very soon, in less than 3 weeks' time, it is the Premier League. But at the time of recording, the lineup isn't out yet, so if the PDC are going to come and get in touch with you, Burton, and say, you know what, we ain't got a clue who we're going to put in, who makes the 8, who are you going for?
Well, obviously Mark Walsh, and you'll edit out this part of it if I don't say it, Costompe as well. No, but all serious, got to start with the tradition, which is the top 4 all go, and even if that wasn't the tradition, I can't see a world in which Michael Smith, Peter Wright, Michael Van Gerwen, and Gerwyn Price were not selected. Okay, Gezi now down to number 4 in the world. He didn't defend his world title. There's been more talk about his kit than about his darts in the past few months, but that's not because he hasn't been playing well. He was defending world title money and still made it all the way to the quarterfinal. He still is one of the 4 best players in the world, or at least one of the 5 best players in the world. Gerwyn Price would be in even if that rule wasn't in effect, as long as he wants to. And I think he wants to. He's gotten better in the Premier League the last couple of years. Still has somehow never made the semifinals of the Premier League. The one event he hasn't so far. But even if they change that, Gerwyn Price is still in. So the top 4, I think Luke Humphries gets in as well, even though he didn't win a major last year. He won 4 Euro Tours, knocked on the door of most of the majors he was in last year as well. He did struggle a bit at the back end of the year, relatively speaking. He was not playing at that same consistency as he was earlier in the year, and maybe that pressure of trying to get his first major to ensure that he goes to the Premier League got to him. I don't know, only he can say that. But I think his overall CV last year and the fact that he's number 5 in the world means Luke Humphries goes in. That means there's only 2 more spots left. I know what you're saying, but aren't there 8 players? But I'm going to defer and say I'm only picking 7 because I'm going to stick my 8th out on the line for whoever does best in the Masters. I like that added perk for what is otherwise just a exhibition event for the top 24 players in the world. To add that added little jewel that someone based on their performances here will get into the Premier League adds something to the Masters. So I am giving 1 spot to that, just like the last couple of years. Johnny Clayton's breakthrough, and well, boy, was it a breakthrough when he won that Masters, because he only went on and won the Premier League itself. The following year, topped the Premier League group stage, won 4 other majors. It's won a pair of World Cups. Well, 1 World Cup since then, one before that. It obviously did wonders for Johnny Clayton, but it also did wonders last year for Joe Cullen. Okay, he didn't win another major after that, but he had a dart to win the very event that he got into by winning the Masters, the Premier League, missing outside double 16 against MVG in a classic final last year. Having that carrot is going to mean one of the spots will go to that, and that is what I'm picking for that. But I still have 2 more players to name, and it's tight. Danny Noppert won the UK Open, but that was so long ago now. Ross Smith won the European Championships, and at the time I said that is not enough to get him even in the conversation, and I stick by that. But he's only gotten better since then. He was brilliant in winning the European Championships. That his performance in the final was a 102 average, and he came down the last few legs to that 102 average. He just was phenomenal, but I think he was even more impressive in the World Championships. I think Ross Smith is in the conversation now because of how well he followed that up. I don't know if he's in the Premier League yet, but I think he's in the conversation. I've heard rumors that Rob Cross does not want to be selected. Otherwise, I think he would be right there in the conversation. Johnny Clayton is in the conversation as well, having topped the league last year, but he, again, didn't have the same results as he did the previous year. And Nathan Aspinall making 2 major finals. It is so tough, and I have to answer the question. I have to pick 2. So I'm going to go... I'll go the major winners. I'll say Ross Smith and Danny Noppert are going to get selected. And that leaves just that 1 spot for whoever does the best from the Masters. So those are my 8. The top 5 in the world, the 2 other major champions last year, and someone for the Masters.
No, I like that. And I think there'll be quite a few of our listeners listening that will go, sign me up if you win a major. That should get you in the Premier League regardless of your ranking and, I guess, stature in the game. So can't argue with that. And I've been refreshing the PDC website today in case the lineup was put out before we recorded this show, because we're not too far away now that we're recording this January 16th. We still don't know the 8 that are going to be lining up in Belfast in the opening night of the Premier League. That's on the 2nd of February. And some years gone by, it's been fairly straightforward to pick the 8 or the 10 as it was before. But this year, like you've touched on there, it's more difficult than it's been for a long time going through those picks. And like you said, going with the top 4 in the world, they're going to be there. You've got Michael Smith, Peter Wright, Michael van Gerwen, Price. I'd imagine they've all booked their booths for Thompson's in Belfast for the after party after the first night of action. The other 4, I was looking at the rankings earlier, and you could make a case for the next 4 in the rankings, and you mentioned all 4 of them: Luke Humphries, Rob Cross, Johnny Clayton and Danny Noppers. You've got the top 8 in the world in the Premier League, and I wouldn't be against that lineup either. I put a tweet out before the final of the World Championship, and my lineup, I had Nathan Aspinall and Dimitri van den Berg in for Luke Humphries and Rob Cross. And Luke Humphries had a brilliant year, got up to number 5 in the world, all the success that he had on the Euro Tour, winning those titles. And even without a major final, I think that puts him right in the mix. And we've seen him picked for these 2 World Series events last week and this week that are going on. So I think that could probably get him in. I think in the lineup, so a debut for Luke Humphries, a full debut in the Premier League. So the top 4, make that the top 5. I'll throw in Johnny Clayton as well for winning the league phase of the Premier League last year and had a good end to last year as well. And yeah, I'll go Dimitri van den Berg and Danny Noppert. That's going to be my 8. But I think the last 2 spots I'm very sketchy on, and you make a good point there with the Masters as well. I think seeing how well that format went with the Premier League in holding off spots before the Masters, and how well Johnny Clayton and Joe Cullen did with that opportunity, I think the PDC, I wouldn't be surprised if they did that again and decide to put that spot on the line for the Masters as well. And since some people suggested maybe Gabriel Clemens or Josh Rock, they might get the call up, but I think for both of them probably would be a little bit too early, but not ruling it out going forward, especially Josh Rock as well, given what he's done in his first year. But I'm definitely intrigued to see who gets those last 4 spots, because there's probably 6, 7, 8 players who could put their hand up right now and have a genuine case for being included. So I'm just hoping that it's not going to be announced until after this episode airs, because then we've spoken about a lineup that's already out.
Yes, indeed. And it feels like weird, because I do have many cop-out answers, but I feel like this time it's not a cop-out. I actually legit, that's what I would pick too. But well, it's not just the Premier League we're waiting. We're waiting the second World Series event of the year. A draw just came out today as the time we're recording for the event in Denmark. But we also need to talk about the one in Bahrain last week as the season got underway, with Michael Smith winning another World Series title, his 3rd televised title in the last 4 events, dating back to last year. Is it too soon, though, to start up again for the top players, you think?
I think it's a good question. And what was it, 9 days after the World Championship final between Michael Smith and Michael van Gerwen, and we're seeing the new world champion, world number 1, back on the big stage this time, as you mentioned, in Bahrain for that first World Series event there. Michael van Gerwen, he was absent because of a pre-arranged family holiday, but you still had Michael Smith, Peter Wright, Gerwyn Price, Luke Humphries, Rob Cross, Johnny Clayton, Dimitri van den Berg, and the return to the World Series for Raymond van Barneveld. But they were all there. Some of them, they'd have had a bit longer break after going out of the World Championships earlier. But I must admit, I didn't catch an awful lot of this event in Bahrain. But looking at the results, particularly from that second day, there was a lot of close games. And Barney looked in pretty good nick, pushed Michael Smith close. But Michael Smith at the moment, just whatever he touches, it does seem to turn to gold, because he's come through some tricky games on that last day, winning all 3 of them by a 2-leg margin to beat Dimitri, Barney, and then Gerwyn Price 8-6 in the final. And there's only one change to that lineup of PDC representatives this week in Denmark. You've got MVG coming back in and Raymond van Barneveld sitting out. As a fan, though, is it too soon? I think even for me, I didn't really have much interest in watching the event last week or this week, really, because I think watching these players again so soon after the World Championship, I do like that there's usually a break of a month or so before we see these top players again, because the back end of the year, October, November, December, it is almost wall-to-wall darts on TV. A lot more interest in Q School, I've got to admit, seeing which players came through that. And I think you saw that reflected on social media as well. There's a lot more darts fans I saw on the timeline. They were focusing on events at Q School rather than the World Series. But as for the players themselves, I think with every passing year now, particularly the top players, we are seeing them start to manage their diary a bit more. You won't see Peter Wright playing every Players' Championship, every Euro Tour event like he did a few years ago when he was going to everything. The PDC would put an event on and he would be there. But I think as long as the players are able to manage their schedule, make time to have a weekend off or a week off at certain times during the year, I don't see it being a big issue for them. But the last thing we want is the players to burn themselves out, because it is a long season, and some might say it's a never-ending season now, because we've barely had a week between the last event of last season to now this one. We've not even handed out our awards yet, and we've got a second TV event of the season on this week. So there is a lot of rewards now for being one of the best dart players in the world. But with that, it does come the sacrifices, the travelling, the flights, the times away from home. But I think they'll know there will be times this year where they can sit out an event, they can sit out a Players' Championship weekend or a Euro Tour and not feel guilty about it and feel like it will be a detriment to their game. So, yeah, managing the schedule is going to be more important now for these top players.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, it is all about managing your schedule, not having a long break. I just don't. There's two things at play here. One is that these events are about growing the sport, and there's only limited amount of times to be able to put them in the calendar, especially like events that require a long flight to get to. Bahrain and Denmark's not nearly as long as the events when they're in Australia or New Zealand or the US. But it still is especially Bahrain is still a bit of a flight for all of these players. It's, 6-7 hours. Denmark is much, much closer. So you have to put it at a time when players could do it without having to miss anything else. And there's nothing else going on except for Q School. And if you're one of the 8 invited players, you're probably not going to Q School unless it's, to watch someone play. So in that regard, I don't know when else you could do this. Keeping August empty could do that, and you can try to fit some of those events, especially now there's only 2 in Australia and New Zealand as opposed to the 3 that there have been in years past, try to fit some more in that time frame. But there's only so many weeks of the year, and if a player doesn't want to play it, they don't have to. That's why Michael Van Gerwen skipped this one. And I think we're going to see the top players more often. We're already seeing it happen, but I think we're going to see it more often where the top players decide, they don't have to play all these World Series events. The PDC is going to need to do a good job to make sure at least a couple of the big names are at all of them, because the goal of these events is to grow the sport. And if Michael Van Gerwen, Peter Wright, Michael Smith, and Gerwyn Price, if 3 of the 4 are skipping them, then it's not meeting its job. But only one of them skipped it, Michael Van Gerwen, and he's going to be back anyway in this next one. So I think there's something to be said for there being longer breaks, but it's through those ranking events and other events that the players can skip. Not these, yes, they're exhibitions, but they're exhibitions that serve a very important purpose in the PDC's plan, and they're going to bring these players a lot more money 3, 6, 10 years down the line than those ranking events, because it's going to increase the television audience. It's going to increase the amount of money that's coming into the PDC through television. These events need to go on when they can fit in the calendar, and this is as good a time as any, if not the only time to put them.
And now we'll move on to our next guest on this week's show. He's another of the new tour card holders for 2023, chatting with Matthew Kiernan, the Darting Nerd. Here's our chat with Dylan Slevin.
Well, it's that time of year on the Weekly Dartscast when we meet the latest additions to the PDC Pro Tour. We're delighted to say we're joined by one of Ireland's hottest young prospects and recent PDC Tour Card winner, Dylan Slevin. Dylan, congratulations. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me anyway.
No worries. Has it sunk in yet? And I'm sure your phone's been buzzing non-stop.
No, it hasn't really sunk in yet. I'm sure it will in the next maybe couple of days. And no, the phone is absolutely buzzing here. It hasn't stopped since I think I lost in the quarter-final. It's just non-stop buzz.
That's wonderful to hear. Well, we'll get stuck into your efforts last week at Q School. But first, it's always nice to get an idea about how you first got involved in the sport. Where did your journey begin in terms of your darts?
I basically just started throwing darts at a young age, and when I was I'd say about knee high, I was up on a chair throwing darts at the board. My dad used to throw darts for county, and he had me up on the chair throwing darts. And then when I got old enough to be able to throw at the board, I got down off the chair and started throwing, and then just kind of fell in love with it then after that, and just travelled around Ireland, then tournaments here, tournaments there, and qualified for the Irish youths team there my first year doing the INDO rankings over here in Ireland, and then made it 2 years in a row. So I said, the father turned around to me and said, Jesus, we might have a crack at this. So I said, yeah, sure, we'll give it a good run anyway.
That's great. And I think there was a World Youth Cup win in there, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, we bet the Netherlands there. I think it was either 2017. I can't really remember. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, clearly it stood you in very good stead. I'm looking at your 2022. We were talking off there just how busy it was for you. You played 79 matches on the development tour, just the 79. It included a semi-final and a quarter-final. What highlights do you remember from your runs last year on the development tour?
For my first year now, I was very surprised with the form that I brought to the development tour, finishing in the top 20. I wasn't really expecting a high finish up there. Well, I know it's not that high, but first year debutant on the development tour, in the top 20 is good. To get to a semi-final, get bet by Josh Rock. Look what he's doing in the sport. Hopefully this year I can do what he's doing and try and replicate it.
Yes, I mean, I was going to bring up Josh Rock because, of course, there's so much hype around Josh. I mean, have your paths crossed in the various circles up until this point, or? Yeah.
Me and Josh we crossed paths there in the World Youth Championships. He bet me along the way to get to the final. In the quarter final, he bet me 6-4. So I owe on to him anyway this year. So hopefully I get it back.
Yes, I'm sure your paths will cross again, absolutely. And another tournament that you enjoyed some success in last year is the Killarney Festival. Yeah, the
Killarney Darts, yeah.
Yeah, and now for those people that are listening that aren't quite sure what that is, can you give us an idea about what a festival of darts that event is?
It's a 4-day tournament. They run out at the INDO. It's the organisation we have over here that runs all the Irish tournaments and has the Irish team and brings us to World Cup, Europe Cups. They run a 4-day tournament in Killarney, County Kerry, and there's two WDF rankings, a gold and a silver. So that's for any of the WDF players. And I had a good run. There of the Friday. I got to the singles, the Killarney Open singles final. I got bet to Gary Stone from Scotland. Got bet to Yella Klassen from the Netherlands on Saturday. And then Sunday I had a fairly good run as well.
Yeah, well, it certainly remains on my bucket list, that tournament, and it included wins, of course, over Neil Duff, Nick Kenny, Richard Veenstra, Chris Lamb, and these are big names. Was it at that sort of moment that you thought, hang on a minute, this is starting to click into gear for me here?
After the Killarney Open, my manager Matthew Ward said to me, are you going to Q School? And I said, sure, yeah, we'll go and give it a go anyway. And he turned around and said to me, well, we won't go and give it a go, you'll just go get your tour card and you'll be on the tour next year. And I said, look, we won't think that far ahead, we'll get the entry into Q School anyway, and then we'll think about it when it comes around. But lucky enough that it happened, that I'm on the tour now, so happy days.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll come on to that in just a sec. But yeah, I mean, and of course, another opportunity you had was at the Modus Super Series as well, which was a good week there for you.
the Thursday and Friday and the Saturday finals night. I was when I got the invitation, I was fairly shocked now, to be honest. And I just said, I'll just go in and just throw my darts. And lucky enough, they went well for me, and I got to the semi-final on my debut and got back to the Raymond Smith there from Australia. So.
Yeah, great experience on that stage and on the stream, of course. So we'll come to Q School now, of course. So you enter the room at Milton Keynes. There's 350 players at that point in the room. What's going through your head at that stage? Is that an intimidating atmosphere, or are you fairly chilled at that point?
No, I would see. I went to Q School last year with just the ambition to get experience for this year we'll say, and I didn't really feel much pressure going into Monday. And then once I got over the line on Monday, it was 2 days off for me to wait till Thursday. And then when Thursday came, I just went in through darts, but I didn't feel like I put much pressure on myself. But then once I was told I had the tour, once I told I qualified to have the tour card, and I went in to play my last 16 game, the weight off my shoulders was unbelievable. I didn't even think I put that much pressure on myself to just try and get the tour card.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, isn't it? So you knew, because I was going to ask, so on that last day, there was a point when you knew that you'd done enough.
Yes, when the last day of the Sunday, when the draw came out, I went back to the table to sit down with all the Irish players, and they said I didn't look at the draw, and I came back to the table and they went, "Oh, you got a bye." And I was like, "Oh no, that's not what I want. I want to play. I want to have a game in hand, just so the nerves are settled." But lucky enough, I came out on top at 6-2 win and took the point just to get a secured spot on the table. So I was happy with that.
Yes, a big relief. I'll just touch on day 3 of stage 2, because there were 2 moments, I feel, that were probably you may have felt that were the turning point for yourself. You were 3-0 down against Niall Cullerton, and then you came back and edged it in a last leg decider, and then 5-0 down against Scott Mitchell. What was going through your head in those 2 games?
When I went 3-0 down, I was just like, "Come on, if you can bring it back to at least 3-3, 4-3, you have a shot." And lucky enough, I bring it back to 3-3, and then Niall went 4-3, and then went 4-4, and then went down to the wire. And lucky enough, I got over the line on that one. When I went 5-0 down against Scott Mitchell, it was nerve-wracking, to say the least. I looked around and turned around to my missus, and she was just like, "Just come on, throw your darts." And when I went 5-1 and 5-2, 5-3, I was like, right, got a small bit of belief back into me, and then throwing for that 1-4-4 to check it out to win the match was a crucial point of the tournament to keep me in, to give me a good run to the semi-final.
Yeah, absolutely. Very crucial points, and it's probably made the difference, didn't it? Definitely. So who was the first person that you sort of celebrated with when you found out you were through and it was all done and dusted on day 4?
Oh, I just literally turned around and just looked at my girlfriend and just said, "Oh my God, I'm on the tour." Like, I had no words. Literally, I was just gobsmacked, to say the least.
Great to hear. We love stories like that, and just a mention for your family, friends, and supporters, because it isn't just yourself, of course, that it's gone into this. Of course, it's all their support as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, Mum and Dad, they've been ringing day in, day out. When I came out with only a pint after every game, Dad was ringing me just saying, "Look, go in the next day, just throw your darts. You know you can do it. You know you have it in you. At least go in, maybe pick up 1-2 points just to keep your points ticking on the board." And that's what I done. And then lucky enough, I got a nice little run on Saturday to put me in a good position on the table, and then just to finish it off on the Sunday. So I was happy.
Wonderful to hear. And do you? And just lastly, I mean, do you have ambitions? Do you set goals now? I mean, it's very fresh still, of course, the fact that what you've achieved, but it's a few weeks' time till it starts. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Look, the ambition is really for every darter out there. You know, it's to play on the big stage, Ali Pali, like, so that's really my main focus this year, is just to try and qualify for that, get enough tournaments in and get enough prize money won, and just try and qualify for Ali Pali on my first year would just be, like I said, getting the tour card's dream come true, but that'd just top off my career, you know.
Love it. Well, Dylan, thank you ever so much for your time. Congratulations once again, and all the best for when the tour starts in just a couple of weeks' time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Dylan for joining us, and we'll finish up the show with a dip into the mailbag, then we'll touch on our Weekly Dartscast Awards. But first, to our listener question. It comes from Jay Bremner Allison, who says, after Q School, I'm a despondent Scotsman, been spoiled over the last decade and with a string of wonderful players, but after our key players not qualifying and those already on tour not challenging for the Worlds, where does Scottish darts go from here?
Yeah, after the last decade, Scotland's been riding high, and Peter Wright made it to world number one, but has spent a bunch of time at world number two. Gary Anderson never made it to a world number one, but spent a good 3-4 years as the world number two when he won those back-to-back world titles, but then a few other times as well up there. And then you add in John Henderson, who made a semifinal at a major, never was a top 16 player, but was just outside it, and has been a top 20 player and was a top 32 player for the better part of a decade until the last couple of years. That doesn't even mention Robert Thornton, who as recently as 2016 beat Michael Van Geuren, or 2015 rather, beat Michael Van Geuren in a major final, also beat Phil Taylor in a major final, but he beat MVG in a major title when MVG was at his very best, when MVG won every other event on Sky that year. Robert Thornton beat him in the World Grand Prix, and it's just not, there's definitely been a drop-off. Peter Wright, we'll see how he does this year. I thought he was getting ready for the World Championships, and because he knows how to do that, but his wife's health problems right at the Grand Slam and Players Championship final took him off his preparation, and rightfully so. I think there are questions about where Peter Wright's game is right now, but I don't think it's as worrying as his 2022 season would make it appear. I think he was ready to peak at the right time, and something off the hockey prevented him from peaking at the right time. But I think he has the right mindset. That said, there'll be a lot of pressure on him this year because he's defending so much. But I'm not as worried about Peter Wright as I might have been otherwise. Gary Anderson, obviously, it is worrying. He's outside the top 20. Neither of us even mentioned him for the Premier League. That doesn't mean he won't be selected, but it would seem to be unlikely that he would be selected based on what we've seen from him over the last couple of years. He still can do it on any given day, but the consistency just hasn't been there. And it seems that Gary Anderson is on the downside of his career. He can always put together a big run in some major in the World Championships and suddenly go back up the rankings. He is good enough, still is good enough to do that enough times in the space of a week, or in the World Championships a couple weeks, to do that, but he just doesn't do it consistently enough to keep his ranking where it needs to be to make sure he's in all the majors. And he still has work this year to make sure he gets to the world match play, because he's not in the top 16 anymore. He still would be right now through the Pro Tour, but again, he needs to keep getting results on the floor, and maybe needs to start playing some Euro Tour events to make sure he gets into the television events, to make sure he starts climbing his rankings. The only Scottish player who really has been on the up is the other guy who's now in the top 32 at number 32, Alan Suter. It's weird saying the future, or at least the near future of Scottish darts is a player in his 40s who never did anything before he was in his 40s. But maybe that is where it is right now, because Alan Suter has shown he has the bottle to compete at the highest level. I don't think we've seen the best from him. He's yet to really bring his best on the floor, or the Euro Tour qualifiers. He barely got to any Euro Tours last year, but he had a good first year, had a good second half of his second year. And when he gets into the television events, he can beat almost anyone. He made his first major quarterfinal at the Grand Slam. He's made a pair of last 16s at the World Championships. And he's a deserving top 32 player. I think he has gears we haven't seen from him. If he can push on and qualify for the World Match Play this year or the World Grand Prix, that will be big, because it'll start to see him rise, not just from, in the in the high 20s, low 30s, but maybe up towards that top 20 in the world, because he doesn't have any of that. He has no television money he's defending until the World Championships. Beyond that, there are some good young players that Scotland is producing, obviously Willie Borland being the most famous, but I don't know where Scottish darts goes next right now. It obviously was a disappointing Q School off of a disappointing World Championships, off of a disappointing 2022 for the entire Scottish contingent. The one exception from 2022 being Robert Thornton becoming World Senior Championship, but I don't think that's the point of this question, because the World Senior Championship is, by its definition, not about the future, but about the past.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the seniors, but Robert Thornton winning 2 of those 3 events that we saw in the first year of the seniors, carrying on the success of Scottish darts. But yeah, as you say, in terms of PDC darts, Scotland's had a lot of success over the last decade or so, with Peter Wright, Gary Anderson both winning a pair of world titles, winning the World Cup, John Henderson getting involved, winning the World Cup a couple of years ago. But last year, we didn't see very much success from the Scottish players on TV, and Alan Suter probably was the highlight, wasn't he, for Scottish players on TV last year in the PDC events, getting to the quarterfinals of the Grand Slam and then getting to the last 16 at Ali Pali again, the furthest player that from Scotland in the World Championship that's just gone. But yeah, in terms of Q School, we had 3 players last year from Scotland get their tour cards. We had Ross Montgomery, who was one of the surprise packages. We never thought he'd go to Q School, let alone win a tour card, but he did last year. Jamie Clark, Cameron Menzies as well. He was they were the other 2 players to get them. And just looking at how Q School went, because we touched on it earlier, some of the players that missed out on tour cards. John Henderson was back at Q School, and hard not to feel for him a little bit, because the 4 defeats that he had in that final stage, 3 of them was 6-5, the other one was 6-4, and those 3 deciders, he had a dart, or he had match darts to win them all. And easy to say it now, but if he'd won all 3 of them games that he had the match darts in the decider or in those games, that would have been enough to see him get a tour card. He would have had 3 extra points. He would have been in via the order of merit. And okay, you look at the final standings, 3 points off, it looks like he's missed out by quite a bit, but those are the fine margins in the end for Hendo and why he missed out. And even in the game against Stephen Burton, 6-4, he averaged a 99 in that one. So a few missed doubles either way. He could have been back on the tour again this year, but he's missed out. Andy Bolton as well, he had a good run on the final day. I think he was 1 win short in the end of getting that. And some other players, we saw Nathan Girvan have a really good first couple of days on the final stage, but the last 2 days regressed quite a bit, didn't produce the game that we're used to seeing from him. And 3 other players that amongst them didn't get any points in that final stage, which was surprising, and that was Jim McEwen, Ryan Murray and Willie Borland, who you mentioned. Neither of them were able to perform in that final stage, and it is a good question, where does Scottish darts go from here? And maybe it is one to ask an Alan Suter or a Ross Montgomery if we get them on the show at some point during the season, because it is a country which has enjoyed a lot of success, and you've only got England and the Netherlands. They've had more men's world champions than Scotland, but the current top 2, Peter Wright, Gary Anderson, they're both now at the latter end of their careers, still high up there in the rankings. Gary at a lower down, but Peter Wright still at number 2, but got a lot to defend this year. But now it is, you'd say, Alan Suter who's continuing to push on now. He's in that top 32, but we've not got any new tour card holders from Scotland for this year, so it is going to be up to Ross, Jamie and Cammy to see what they can do this year and see if they can get in the top 64 at the end of it.
And then lastly, 3rd annual Weekly Dartscast Awards. We'll reveal those on Sunday on our Twitter. But Alex, who did you vote for Player of the Year and Guest of the Year? And for our listeners, just so you know, the Player of the Year candidates were Michael Smith, Michael Van Geuren, Luke Humphreys, and Josh Rock. And the Guests of the Year were Dan Dawson, Wayne Martle, Simon Whitlock, Andrew Gilding, Paul Lim, John Part, and Andrei Omolchenko, the Ukrainian qualifier for the World Championships.
What a lineup. Yeah, I put my picks out on Twitter who I would go for each award, and with Player of the Year, something that we discussed off air who we would vote for, because going into the World Championships, Michael Van Geuren, he would have been a clear winner of this award, but I think Michael Smith beating him in the final at Ali Pali and off the back of winning the Grand Slam, his first major, I think I've got a sway towards Michael Smith now, and also throwing that final, getting the 9 darter, the best leg ever. and getting to number one in the world off the back of it. It was an incredible year for Michael Smith, and he achieved a lot of things that he'd never done before, winning major titles, getting to number one, becoming a senior world champion. And whereas for Michael van Gerwen, yes, in most other years, the titles that he won, that would have been made him a favourite for it. And he's also had a great year getting back to major winning form. But yeah, my vote goes to Michael Smith for that. Michael van Gerwen at number 2. And as far as guests, well, this will be the first year doing these awards that we've not had a presenter from Sky win it, because we've had Dave Clark and Emma Payton win it the last 2 years. I put a few contenders down I was thinking of when I was deciding who I was going to nominate to begin with. Sean Wilkinson, who spoke with Matthew Kiernan just after he won his tour card at Q School, one of the unknown packages from last year's Q School. Also Richie Burnett, he's calling it his last dance after winning back his card, and someone that I've wanted to get on the show for a longer chat, a 15-20 minute chat, and he was great to chat to. And 2 others who had breakthrough years after difficult first years with their tour cards, Martin Lukeman and Andrew Gilding, enjoyed those 2 chats. And I'll also give a mention to Nathan Aspinall, who spoke so openly about his injury problems at the start of the year. And I went to the UK Open a week later and had people come up to me saying how much they enjoyed that interview in particular. So that one gets a mention. And 2 from Lakeside, the trip I made to Lakeside, Dave Parletti, after he won his first game at a World Championship, speaking in the smoking area at Lakeside. And we had Steve Hine, the Muffin Man, wandering in mid-interview to tell Dave that he had top bollocks for winning that game. And the in-person chat with the GOAT, of course, Coach Stompe, which was a nice surprise. But for me, the vote for Guest of the Year, it is going to go to Andrew Gilding, because he's someone that very rarely gives interviews. It's not something that he particularly enjoys, I would imagine, that side of darts, and he's a hard man to get hold of, but he did eventually give us some of his time. We're really grateful for that, and he was good value. So for me, Andrew Gilding is my favourite guest from 2022.
Well, you mentioned the 2 I was going to mention, one of which was nominated, one of which wasn't. So I'll go backwards in this, since I'm talking about the guest of the year first. But I was going to say Aspinall and Gilding as well. I thought that Aspinall interview was just fantastic. One of the best ones we've done in a few years now, I think. And I don't mean that as an insult to the others, but I mean, I think part of it is, there are players who are easier to interview because they have that experience. And, once you get into the Premier League, you have to have that experience, and your manager will make sure you get that you get comfortable with interviews. And Nathan Aspinall, I think he's always been fairly comfortable, at least since we've started the show. He isn't a player that, because of that experience, is easier to interview. But, the camaraderie and the trust that he has in us meant that he gave us some really honest answers about his injury and about where he was mentally with his career at the start of the year. And I think that just made for a very good interview and a very good listen. If I had gotten my nominations, and I was going to nominate that, but I had some computer problems this past week, hence why we didn't have an episode this past week. So I didn't get that chance to nominate it. But of the ones that are nominated, I also was going to go Andrew Gilding. You didn't mention it, but we've been trying to get Gilding on the show almost since the first season. I mean, I remember, I think it was the second season, he was off the tour, but was playing some electric stuff while off the tour. And we tried to get him on, but just could never get in contact, never get in touch with him. We've tried a few times since then, but we finally got him this year, as he's had his renaissance year, making a pair of finals, playing for a while, some top 16 caliber stuff. We got him on right at that time. And as you said, he's a player that is a difficult person to track down, but it was great to get him, especially since one of the other nominees, Dan Dawson, that we had on, talked about Andrew Gilding when we had him on earlier this year as well. As far as player of the year, I'll mention one player who wasn't nominated. I thought it should be a 3-way race, and 2 of them were nominated, Michael Smith and Michael van Gerwen. But I thought that Bo Greaves deserved to be nominated as well, losing only 2 matches all year against other female competitors. We only saw her play against men once, and she didn't have her best game. But the 3-0 scoreline wasn't as it was more harsh than it deserved. Willie O'Connor played a good match that game, and Bo Greaves just didn't take her chances. But that easily could have been a more competitive match. But again, she only lost 2 matches all year against women, one of them being in the World Open near the end of the year, and then she lost one in the middle of the year. Other than that, undefeated in the women's series, undefeated in almost every other WDF competition this year. I thought she deserved to be nominated. I thought it was a tough 3-way race between them for who I would pick. I want to agree. I want to go Michael Smith, and he did win the biggest and most important event. He did win the 3rd or 4th biggest event in the Grand Slam, but Michael Van Gerwen won the 2nd biggest event, and the 3rd or 4th biggest event, and the 4th or 5th biggest event. He won almost every other event other than the World Championship, and he just had a really, really good year. I think Michael Van Gerwen gets my vote, but it is tough. It is very tight between all 3 of the ones I mentioned, because they all in different ways had phenomenal years that are, I think, in my mind, deserving of being in that conversation. There wasn't a runaway winner, even though I think like what Michael Van Gerwen did or what Michael Smith did may have been runaway in some years. It wasn't this year because all 3 of them had really good campaigns. Anything else for this week?
Well, of course, it's not up to us. It is up to our listeners, and we had more than 500 votes this year. So big thank you to everyone that took the time out to vote for our awards. We did have 19 awards to vote for in the end. So thanks everyone that got involved with that nominated, that voted. And we're going to be revealing the winners this weekend on Sunday. So keep an eye out on our Twitter for that. And we should say a big thank you to Darts Tracker, Dart Wolf, Master Caller, iDarts, BMAF Darts Actual, the Raffle Brothers and Dartistic. They've all sponsored awards this year, so we appreciate that support. Keep an eye out for the awards being revealed, the winners this weekend. And just to say a big thank you as well to our guests for joining us, to Graham, to Dylan and to Matthew Kiernan for providing us with that chat with Dylan. And we'll try and get you a few more new tour card holders on the show over the next few weeks. We're up to 101 of the current crop of 128 tour card holders to have appeared on the show. So let us know who you want to hear from on the show. And as always, big thanks to our sponsor Dartwolf for their continued support. More Dynamite Darts content, go to dartwolf.tv, give Dartwolf a follow at Dartwolf180 on Twitter. And if you're hanging tight for the awards, not too long to wait now to find out the winners. If you're watching the World Series this week or even playing darts yourself, just follow my advice and make sure you enjoy the darts.
It really is like, it brings a smile to my face, because I remember there was 2 years ago, or a little over a year ago now, that our goal was to get to 100 before the end of the season. And now we're starting the year, and 101 of the 128 tour card holders are already alums of this show. It brings a smile to my face. And, it's credit, especially to you, Alex, for the effort that you put in to get those players on, because it some of them it is difficult to track down. And then credit as well, not just to you, but also to Hannah and Matthew for their work in getting some of those players and doing some of those interviews as well. Let's see if we can. There's 27 that we haven't had. There's a couple that I don't think their English will allow them to be guests, but let's see if we can at least get it up, to 115, 116, or let's say 118. There'll be no more than 10 left by the end of the year. I think that's a fair goal, and one that I think is hopefully attainable. If we can get all 128, then let's do it. But we'll play it by ear. But yeah, thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to everyone. Get ready to enjoy the darts. It's going to be a bunch of it this year. The second year back with a full calendar of events after a couple of dark years with COVID. So a lot to look forward to. I just have to hang tight a little bit longer until that comes about.